we do within the red, and I'm happy to just dive into that more, ask me questions, and also just share how we interface with Beeline in particular, and work within the red as a whole. But maybe I'll pass it for intros more. Does that sound good, Sydney, or do you want me to say more now?
Yeah, no, that sounds great to queue it up. I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions. And then I think, Franklin, you are up next.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Franklin Jones. I'm founder and CEO of Beeline Urban Delivery. We began service to the Portland community in 2009 as a last mile logistics provider. We are unique in the fact that we utilize primarily large tricycle trucks to deliver goods within the Portland urban core. And those goods historically have been food and beverage, although not exclusively with food and beverage. And about 2015 or so, we were addressed and invited into the red community to look at running kind of the warehousing and logistics component for the red. And so we jumped on board and became the master tenant at the foundation of the red back when Sydney was at the helm of kind of putting things together in terms of the overall structure and kind of the pieces of the operations. So Beeline's been at this for a while now, and kind of fast forward to today, our role at the red is to be the master tenant in terms of providing shared warehousing and logistics service. So it's what we would call a open but managed warehouse, and primarily that is servicing the regional food economy. And when we speak of the regional food economy, there's two primary components that we hope that we're providing services for, and that is emerging producers, growers, ranchers, fishermen, kind of the quintessential ag in the middle, which was the kind of the original focus of the red. And then also for emerging producers, particularly within the BIPOC community, that are creating value-added products going into the various markets. And when I speak of markets, I speak not only of grocery retail markets. Our greatest and our largest partner in that world is New Seasons Markets, but also in the broader spectrum of different sales categories, as we support and represent warehousing, logistics, and delivery services to go into grocery retail, food services, restaurants, etc., as well as direct-to-consumer home delivery. So there's a very broad spectrum of how we plug in and support this regional food economy. And in many cases, really, it's best understood as we're providing an a la carte service offering to our vendors and to our clients to support their warehousing and delivery of goods, services. And then there's a whole host of allied services that come with those two broader perspectives. And I'll leave most of the juicy stuff to the Q&A, but when we speak of the licensings in general, we hold a kind of an umbrella license as a food and beverage warehouse, a box in, what we would call a box in, box out warehouse. And then everybody that rents space, essentially everybody that rents space underneath us as subtenants, they hold independent licenses as well, depending on their company and what they do. So there's lots of layers of licensings and certifications that happen within the red itself, and then how all of those get executed and implemented. That's kind of the interesting puzzle.
Thank you. Emma, do you want to jump in and talk about what the red itself does and holds, and how it works with your tenants and subtenants and sub-subtenants?
Hi all, I'm Emma. Super excited to be on this and just reconnect with the Food Hub community. Yes, so the red is spelled R-E-D-D because we named it after the nests that salmon dig in rivers to spawn. And so it's also happens to be on Salmon Street, not that that has anything to do with it. But we really are, the purpose of the development project that we started years ago feels like was really to kind of serve the regional food economy and provide necessary infrastructure to scale and grow that and enable businesses, particularly in Portland, but also beyond that through the community that we've collectively created in the entire bioregion. And EcoTrust is the kind, quite curious, sometimes sassy landlord of the red facility. So truly, we are the landlord, and to us, that means more of a community partner than anything else. And we hold kind of the structure together, and at the beginning of the project, developed the overall sort of community good manufacturing practices for the building to then enable the master tenants, Franklin and Hannah being two of them, to really run their show and be partners in the sort of licensing and food safety support side, but we don't hold those particular licenses ourselves as the landlord. So it really is designated based on the space and the tenant and their business operation and how that flows with the licensing required for that space. And then we try to kind of knit the pieces together as they so desire. So we like to think of it as an ecosystem, and really the different components of the master tenants functioning independently and then interdependently is essential to the campus. And y'all are quite familiar with that. I mean, imagine as Food Hub leaders. And yeah, my day-to-day is really sort of directing the operations of the whole campus and overseeing that for EcoTrust as a community partner in this project. And it's more than a project now. I feel like it's a full functioning entity. And we have two buildings. So the one building we're focused on today is the red west side of the campus. So it's the warehouse components, the kitchen components, office, and across the street with a big lot in between is an event center and some office space. And our EcoTrust events team is our master tenant in that building. So they run all sorts of neat events. Maybe some of y'all have been to some of these prior to COVID. And then yeah, we use that lot as a space to also host everything from the farmers markets to big weddings and hopefully more Food Hub related events. That's my jam. Yeah, and maybe I'll stop there. I think we want to make space for Q&A.
We already have one in the chat, which is that Carrie, who is down in Southern Oregon, is learning that land zoning impacts what can and cannot be done. So what zoning is the red?
Yeah, Sydney, do you recall? I was, I know there's different zoning per building.
Yeah,
like
it was light industrial.
Yes.
I think they were both in light industrial. And that was what was complicating with the office. And that is why you were limited on the number of events that you can do per year. I'm like, this is like ancient history for me. Why you're limited on how many
built out the
events you can
red,
do.
by the way. I meant to say that Sydney is the original red mastermind behind how all the pieces function. So you're really.
I don't know that I'm a mastermind, but I did help get some, floor drains in.
Yeah, located in the central East Side Industrial District, that enables, so yes, the answer, overarching answer is yes, the land use and the zoning laws definitely depict what you can and can't do in different areas. And it gets a little bit interesting when you look at commercial zones, and warehouse, the combination between commercial and warehousing, because warehousing typically doesn't land in commercial zones. And yet a shared food kitchen can be seen as a commercial entity. So there's this interesting hybrid, and I would say that interesting hybrid is kind of the default answer to a lot of questions. It's an interesting hybrid, and because it's a hybrid, that means that not many people know what to do with the entity. But specifically, it's in a light industrial use area, and it's an opportunity zone as well. So that kind of created different opportunity zones, create different opportunities for different types of development. So that would, to some degree, is what enables this to be a hybrid entity.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, sorry. A great example of that is just like our parking lot, which is not actually a parking lot, is zoned flexible plaza. So it's like a full block almost of outside space that we can use for parking and also transform it into a events flexible use space. So hence, yeah, the hybrid structure.
And I think what's coming up here is, outside of like the specific food specific licensing, that all of your activities, especially those of you who are doing new hub projects or new activities, you will fall under some sort of county or city licensing for the activities that can happen inside your building. So you have kind of your building zoning licensing issues, and then your food business activity licensing issues. And this is that shared language that we're talking about trying to understand, which is, what license am I talking about, and who do I then go talk to about it? So Carrie, yes, it looks like you probably need to talk to your county. What other questions do we have? I cannot believe there's no more and this call is over already.
Oh,
Christy Athens.
Settle down. Well, this is more a question on that will only benefit me possibly, but so I have a small food hub in Northeast Oregon. I have a potato farmer who drives potatoes to Portland. He also brings Carmen Ranch to you all, and very conveniently for me now picks up tray fin fish, brings it back. Is there, of course I am hearing this and thinking, well, what else is in that building that I could have Patrick bring back? So is there like a central directory of tenants, or could you send one to me?
Sure.
Okay.
We have a directory that we update that includes master tenants and subtenants and
Okay.
the list of businesses, but you could also go direct to Hannah or Franklin too, based on like the specifics of what you're looking for.
Sure.
We do as sort of the community managers, update a regular community directory.
Awesome. I'll drop my email in the chat, and whoever wants to send me that list, if you would, please, that would be awesome.
I do have a question, basically to Franklin. Good seeing you again, Franklin. Because you said New Seasons is your larger contract as it relates to retail. What's your radius with the kind of vehicles or trikes you use? How far do you guys go out? Because New Seasons, they have a pretty large footprint. So how do you guys negotiate that when you have a larger footprint? What do you guys do with that?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question directly, and then I'll also touch on kind of some of the mechanisms that I think make this current iteration of the RED successful. and some areas where, you know, where the layers are and how it can continue to grow. So specifically Beeline's radius and vehicle use. Our radius is about, right now, it's about actually about a 4-mile radius. So we've got trikes that have a pretty far range and extended battery use because of the way that we run kind of dual batteries on a certain trike. And that, so to give you a sense, that enables us to go from here in Central East Side all the way out to Harbor Lodge or Concordia in the Northeast stores. And then we also take trikes to Woodstock and Sellwood in the other direction. So of the 18 stores of New Seasons, 8 of them, I believe, are consistently delivered on trikes. Now the other ones, then those are delivered, those are serviced via a traditional box truck. So we also have a box truck in our system, and it runs essentially 7 days a week. And that the usage of that box truck is twofold. One is to service the outlying grocery retailers and larger stops, and the other one is to move pallets to and from the warehouse. So we might pick up from an auxiliary warehouse or another third-party warehouser like Heritage Logistics Company, or we might pick up pallets from a producer or another co-packer and then bring them into the facility on behalf of the client. Or we might be moving pallets out of here and taking them someplace. We used to do more of that probably 2.5, 3 years ago. But now, as the growth of the programs, we have multiple programs stacked with New Seasons. As those programs continue to grow, the utilization of that truck asset is almost 100% in the New Season service area. But that kind of gives you a sense of the mode. But in transportation, we call that mode split between trikes and trucks. Obviously, we love to get the trikes out there as much as possible, doing what they do best. And the trikes are really they're the greatest vehicle and asset to do multiple small stop deliveries within a tight urban core. They're not the best vehicle to take 800 pounds of product and go to one store with.
Right.
Excuse me.
Okay. Thank you.
So have you thought about putting in little, sort of outlying mini warehouses so that you could extend your delivery area when you're done choking to death?
Franklin, you're mute.
The continued iteration of Beeline is really looking at what we would call micro warehousing. And I like to, instead of call it a micro warehousing, I like to call it more of a neighborhood hub or a community hub based model. In fact, we're looking at putting more, rather than an 18,000 square foot warehouse, put something more like a 500 foot facility that enables both collection of and distribution through. So like what we would call cross-docking. And that's how Beeline began. We literally started in like 250 square feet of space, like with 2 trikes and shared utilization of warehousing, just a couple of blocks down from where we are now. And for half of our history, we did not have any warehousing. We just moved product in, product out, in and out. And that primary customer that's been with us since day one is organically grown company. And so when we look at what the growth is, it's really looking at what are these neighborhood hubs and how to maximize the movement of goods within neighborhoods and expanding beyond food and beverage, moving parcels, everything. Just because neighborhoods aren't designed for the amount of truck and commercial traffic that are in them now. So that's really kind of the ultimate vision. But if that's, and many more, that's much more like the trike specific side. When we look at like the food hub and what makes it work and where the opportunities there are, Emma and I and Cindy prior, we often talk, and Hannah, we often look at the synergies of the supply chain and really try to figure out what's the pull factor, who's buying this product. because there's a lot of push. There are a lot of vendors, producers that want to bring products to the market and push product into the market. But if you don't have any pull, then you don't have your throughput, and your throughput is really what makes it all sing, because throughput is an indication of how much is being actually produced and sold.
Right.
And for us to judge how successful this project is, as Spencer used to always say, it's not a model, it's an experiment. And for us to judge the success of this experiment, it really would fall down to what is the throughput, the commercial throughput of product in a annual system, and where does that then benefit? How does that benefit the food dollar back down to the producers themselves? So, and hopefully, if we're doing it correctly, we're not extracting a lot of dollar out of that food dollar, and that gets closer to its source. It's very difficult to do, especially in increasing labor markets, where the cost of moving those goods, moving and storing those goods, those costs are increasing and outpacing what we would ever be able to charge. So we're kind of in like a little squeeze right now, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to do that. And part of that is really this open warehouse model, which says we're not going to take on too much liability of everything. We're going to kind of push some of that liability down to the vendors themselves. So if we talk about ownership of product, Beeline does not own any of the product that's in this warehouse. And there's millions, if not $1 billion of product in the warehouse. So we don't own a piece of that, which also means we don't own the liability in terms of the custody of that. It's all pushed down to the vendors. We as an entity try to push as much liability as possible downstream. What we hold for liability is cold chain custody when it's in the cold chain and food warehousing safety practices while it's in the warehouse. That's our responsibility, as well as transportation, safety and sanitation. So when it gets to a store, it's getting to the store in its correct form, manner. If it's supposed to be frozen, it gets in frozen. If it's temped, it gets temped. All these pieces is where the actual practices of the operating procedures and the health procedures come into play.
So if you're not owning anything, and I try to do this as much as possible with my warehouse, which is, a fraction of what you're doing, but yeah, I don't purchase produce unless it's been ordered by someone. So I'm not eating those costs if it doesn't sell it and whatnot. But how are you invoicing then?
So we invoice.
Where are you?
Yeah, we essentially invoice on two different levels. Space, it's rent. It's a rent model.
Sure. But for where you're delivering the food, so are you, you deliver food to New Seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Are they paying you or are they paying the vendors?
New Seasons?
Yeah.
Both.
Okay. Good work.
The New Seasons relationship is particularly unique.
Okay.
So it's very difficult to say that it could be duplicated. And that is because New Seasons has an extremely strong commitment to developing the local food economy, as does Market of Choice in some other locations. So in this case, we provide, when we do a delivery service, we bill the vendors, they're our clients. We bill them a percentage of invoice. And then we also bill New Seasons a percentage of that same invoice. So it's kind of a split.
Okay.
The relationship between the buyer and the seller, though, we're purely a service provider. The relationship between the buyer and seller remains with New Seasons and the vendor. So while we provide distributive services, we are not the distributor of record. So we don't buy that product and then sell it to New Seasons.
Got it.
And that has been a little bit of a magic special sauce, but it's also really complicated and in some ways maybe an Achilles heel because of challenges with scaling that model with other within other sales categories or other grocery retailers.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
So I think a takeaway for a lot of you is like what Franklin's model is sort of in a way FedEx. You're taking it to FedEx. You're saying FedEx, deliver for me, and he is not owning the product. A lot of you do own the product, or you are commissioning the product, and in those two cases, you still have the liability and you still fall under the licensing requirements of those activities, which are wholesale activities.
Right.
Now, a unique wrinkle in this is that we're beginning through the institutional purchasing project. We are beginning to launch into a category where we actually do get paid by the hospital, in this case Legacy, to deliver the goods. We manage the order and the delivery of local products. So we're actually taking a step towards that distribution side, and then we do a pass-through cost and move the money over to the vendors themselves. So that's a step towards distribution.
Right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to take more of those steps, or at least create an opportunity for companies to grow into that those steps. One of the challenges within this model is when a company grows in size, then they outgrow the model of the red, because now they need true distribution to a larger geographical region. They need larger warehousing. They need a larger production facility. So we actually have graduated a number of different companies over the past 5 years, which is awesome. But we're also seeing our largest customers go bye-bye. And then we have to kind of, build the next setup.
You're trying to capture some of that.
Yeah. So if there was a way for us to maintain and broaden our distribution, if it will, our regional footprint, then we would be able to retain some of that revenue. And one of the really cool ways that potentially is coming on is related to this group in particular, is trying to figure out what is the network of food hubs and leveraging a ordering platform across a food hub network and managing the transportation of products to and from food hubs so now you're increasing the ability to go into different sales categories and different sales markets and regions.
Yeah, I think that's where this group is maybe sort of heading. Anyway, I'll step back because I know there's other questions.
Caitlin, we'll take you, and then Carrie's got a couple in there.
Yeah, so I'm up in Astoria, and we have a commercial kitchen rental and an online farmers market, and we deal with a lot of really small business owners and new business owners. So I'm kind of wondering about licensing on the technical assistance side. If any of you deal with new clients or vendors that you're bringing on, and they need you to walk through the licensing with them, they need a lot of help. Is that the case in your business? And then if that is, how do you kind of deal with that in terms of staff time and paying for that time? Do you have an application fee, things like that? I regularly will spend like 5 to 10 hours helping someone, and then they get stuck at a food processing license or HACCP, and then we lose them. They don't ever end up working with us. But I spent that time. So just wondering if that's something that you guys deal with and how you've managed that.
What specifically are you helping them with? My understanding is that that's the responsibility of the ODA, and we advocate at the Getting Your Recipe to Market program to become friends with your ODA, licensed person. Become close with them, send them your labels while you're working on the design, talk to them about your process, check in with them, that kind of thing. Don't be afraid of them. Is it really, 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 really specific to licensing that you're supporting them with, or is it stuff around getting ready for licensing?
It's Probably both, but yeah, I do encourage them to go straight to our ODA rep, and I have a really good relationship with our ODA rep, but the answers that they get from ODA is kind of like legal text that they find hard to, I have to translate that for them. And then they're asking me the questions. And so it's like this conversation that I'm having with ODA. And it also becomes a bottleneck where I'll tell them, go talk to the ODA person. And then like 3 months later, they haven't heard the answers back or they're still confused. So we end up taking on that work because I want to bring on a kitchen renter and I want to help them get on as soon as possible. And we often, yeah, we have that bottleneck, or they don't know if they do need to have a HACCP plan. So I have to like go help them research that and like what their process is. And yeah, it hasn't been super successful to just tell them to go talk to ODA in the past. It's more like there's a bit of handholding and like translating there that we have to do.
I think that's good feedback actually for the Oregon Department of Agriculture, because I know that they want to be better resources. And I don't know if you've heard Eric Garman talk in this group, but they're working on like a roadmap for food businesses. I'll grab the link and share it in the chat in a little bit, but yeah, I think that's actually like maybe something to do some advocacy around, like that their rep should be supporting those makers more holistically. But that's amazing that you're supporting everyone. But yeah, that seems like probably it's pulling at your capacity. Oh, great. Thank you, Christy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Hannah, a lot of
thanks.
these guys started actually moving food in different ways in 2020, a lot of the hubs that are on this call. And so, now we're all trying to figure out who actually should be doing the work of helping folks with licensing and what kind of requirements. There's a couple of questions in the chat about insurance requirements and things like that. What should we be requiring our vendors to hold for us? So that's where those questions are coming from. Go ahead, Franklin.
I can kind of answer some of those questions in relation to the Beeline world. It's always in relation to what license you hold and what services you actually provide. In some ways, the Beeline world is pretty simple, and we made a conscious choice to really just be a box in and box out warehouse because of the sealed container issue. And then what we do, so when we look at our licensing, we essentially hold a licensed food warehouse for ODA and under FDA, so bioterrorism. And then and that's pretty much the limit of our requirements. We then also go a little bit of the extra mile and hold a license for a meat seller, as well as a license for a fish, but not seafood. And that is because we have meat sellers who operate underneath us, as well as fisheries that operate underneath us. And it's kind of it's a catch-all. We don't have to have it, but it's recommended, and it's not that expensive to do, just to hold that meat seller's license. And then in terms of insurance, and that's kind of where we're box in, box warehouse, that's where we set. And then what we do is our agreements with our customers require them to hold their own general liability and insurance and their own, any of their own food safety certifications. And they have to be able to produce those and send them through. And in the case of where we step in and when there's a problem. So in terms of, and cold chain is probably the biggest kind of concern area. And so what we step in terms of our services side is pretty much anything that's coming into the warehouse. We're temping, we're doing the temp. We act as that receiver. So we do the temperature checks and we make sure it's good and we log it and away to go if it needs to be temperature checked. And this is especially true with the hierarchy with all the new product going into new seasons. And then we do the same thing on our delivery and our transport sides. So if we are taking a product into New Seasons and it does not make temperature, that's on us, and we end up reimbursing the client for that product. So we're pretty serious about how do we maintain temperature. Same with food damage. If there's negligence or food damage, we're pulling salsa for a client, putting on a cart to get delivered, and we dropped it, that's on us. But if there is, a client comes to us and says, hey, gee, there's a case that walked away, we don't know where it is. We say, we don't have any, if there's no document that it was related to us, there was no negligence on Beeline's part, then sorry, that's on you. So luckily, the community has kind of policed itself to some degree. We do not have a big issue with theft, although we always are looking at ways to mitigate that. And we will have plans to put security cameras in and those types of deterrents. But ultimately, it's the community being the community that's going to keep that running. And I think that I probably touched on most of those insurance and food safety liability questions, but I can answer more specifically.
I think you got them. Who else has questions?
I will say that the ODA over the course of the years, ODA and FDA over the course of the now 7 years of operating this business is getting used to what it is. And they're like, oh, you're in the red, great. Beeline has this, Community Co-Pack has this, you have this. It's also, it's just layers of the same thing. And so I don't know that's as efficient as it could be. But it's the structure that works currently.
I think one of the takeaways that I'm hearing for all of you is get to know your ODA and county or city regulators and have these conversations with them early and often so that you can build plans that make sense rather than having to backpedal and change your whole operation, which I know, cat's out of the bag for some of us on that right now, and we're working through that right now. But in terms of like how you go forward, really engaging with your regulators and describing what you are and what you do and being clear on that and who you serve and how you serve them will help you get the licensing answers that you need, because it's completely overwhelming when you start reading the documentation on licensing.
And it is about documentation. The biggest hurdle is writing the documentation and showing that you're implementing and keeping up with the recording of that documentation. The actual practice is just kind of common sense. We do it by nature. But the recording and the burden of proof, so to speak, that is very time consuming, and the organization thereof takes a lot of efforts.
And I would kind of concur with what Sydney was saying, even beyond, especially if you're doing a startup project or hub, invite some of those people to come out to your opening and talk to your vendors or the people in the community, because it will have a return on that investment, which we had a chance to do out here in Rockwood in 2017. Eric Gardner came out here. We were doing an Indonesian international food 2-day event, and Eric came out and to speak at I think it was our Friday. And since then, that has opened so many opportunities with them to understand what we're doing here, who we are and such. So don't be shy. We're paying those people. Okay. Have them come out and talk to you guys and talk to them, because again, we're paying them.
There's a question for Hannah about scales, licensed scales.
Yeah, that's a great question that I feel like I have half the answer on, which is each maker, in my experience, needs different types of scales for their product, right? If they're doing spice blends or low volume, they need a really super sensitive scale. And then if you're doing like heavier weight items, that you need like a scale that will go up to 50 pounds and is more of a production scale, that's different. I'm less actually, to be honest, familiar with the licensing of scales. I don't remember ever getting any of our scales ever licensed when we were in production, when at Better Bean back in the day. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything to input about that. I mean, sharing, that makes sense. But typically people have their own scales for their own product and they pick what works for their process.
Emma or Franklin, do you happen to know what's going on in any of the other kitchens, or if there's any shared scales being used?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question, and appreciate Hannah's response in that. Certainly something we can explore in supporting and enabling that. The other kitchen next door to Community Co-Pack is a shared commissary space. So we have a master tenant that rents out hours to plant-based companies. And I know each business is responsible for its own licensing, but they're supported by the it's called New Foods Kitchen. I'm sure folks are familiar, but the owner of New Foods Kitchen helps each client or subtenant, so to speak, with the licensing, but they each are responsible for their own.
I'm guessing the scale, like with a commercial kitchen, everyone needs to get their own license within the kitchen. I don't know it for a fact, but I would guess that the scale itself could just be licensed once and just be cool, but I don't know.
As long as, that's probably true, as long as there's a record of calibration.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same with the cold chain temperature devices. As long as we have a protocol and documentation of calibration, then you could have a shared asset.
Yeah, it's true.
Emma, would you mind reaching out to Joe and asking him that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one, Caitlin. Carrie, we've got a hand up for you. Let's hear it.
So I was just gonna provide input on the scale. The scales should be certified through the Department of Weights and Measures. It's I believe it's a $25 annual fee, and they're supposed to come verify that your scale is accurate, but I have never had anyone come and verify my scale, even though I've been licensing it for 5 years now. I do share it with my producers who come in who don't have a digital scale at home, because some of my small scale producers were using like their bathroom scale. And when we were billing on like pound weights, and first of all, I don't really want, produce that had people's feet, in the bathroom on the same tool. Secondly, if we're paying off of rates of pounds, you want that to be pretty accurate. So I just offered my license scale, and they would pick it in the field and bring it to me, and I would weigh it. So it was a little more time to do that, when I was receiving orders, but I felt like it improved the food safety aspect and accuracy for billing.
That's pretty awesome. What other questions do we have?
I would make a quick comment. The only challenge I would have with a shared environment and something as somewhat sensitive as a scale is making sure they understand that that's a shared responsibility. because somebody could come in and offset the scale, and then somebody the next day or whatever, and all of a sudden it throws their whole system off balance. But yeah, I think a shared scale is definitely the key, and definitely not a bathroom scale, but making sure they understand the importance of shared responsibility in that, because they might be new vendors as well.
We have a question from Michelle about rural versus, I'm not reading as fast as I should be. Michelle, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is really eye-opening, but I was curious just about rural communities, like communities outside of the Portland area. I realize there's, of course, a lot of activity in the Portland metro area. There's a lot of demand for that. But I was just curious if there's anything happening between Medford and Cottage Grove. I know that there is a food hub in Medford, and there's, of course, one in Cottage Grove with Kim Johnson, who's on the call now. But there's nothing really in between the two. So I was just curious about like any distribution or delivery models happening in the more rural parts of the state.
Yeah, we have a couple of rural hubs on here. Katie Swanson with Klamath Farmers Online Marketplace is on the call. And I don't know, Katie, if you want to talk about your distribution model or if you're working and listening in today. And then we also have a couple of other online marketplaces that are not on the call that are doing some distribution at a smaller scale, and FoodWeb and Food Roots on the North Coast have also done some small scale distribution. But it's what what you're pointing out, Michelle, really is that it can be really hard outside of a population center to manage distribution and make it pencil out, whether it's with trikes or with trucks. Those miles between deliveries costs time, and there's no revenue associated with that time.
That is the pickle, isn't it?
It is. And Katie Swanson said that she can share about Klamath Falls.
Yeah, I'm really interested to understand how food moves through communities outside of urban metro areas. I know that there are a lot of farms just across the state, small farms, homesteads, people producing food, all kinds of things, wonderful things happening. But how does it reach rural communities? Sorry, I'm laughing. It's not really funny, right? Like it's a really interesting thing to contemplate. Is there enough demand to support, like economically, is there enough demand to support some kind of infrastructure that helps distribute food to rural communities? Is a food hub even the answer for rural communities, or is there some other model, right, that would work better? These are just like my curiosity questions. So not trying to burden everybody with like the minutia that goes on in my brain, but I was really just curious about if there were other outside of like, the Willamette Valley and Portland area, if there were any other kind of innovative models in the works or working or maybe not working that, might be jump off points for something in other rural communities. And then I'll be quiet.
A bunch of them. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Could I interject and just ask Michelle, what does OPN stand for? I'm sure I know this already, but
it's the Oregon Pasture Network. I'm the program manager of the Oregon Pasture Network. So I work with, producers who produce pastured meat products.
Right.
And
family farmers.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, there's a huge network on the east side. You should come over and check us out.
I would love that. We'll have to connect. I'll put my email in the chat and you can ping me.
Great.
Michelle, I'll put in the chat the Food Hub Networks map, which is already out of date because we have even more hubs on on
I
these
have
calls
it.
than, oh, you do.
I,
So you can see
I
that there
yeah,
are some rural folks.
I did a post about it on OPN social media that there are 11 food hubs in the state. Yeah, send me the updated information. I wanna know.
Great. We have a whole bunch going on in the chat. We have Emma and Franklin and Hannah. I'm not sure how much longer you can stay. It's about almost 2:00, so we'll probably take you all the way to the top of the hour. So I think we probably have time for maybe one more question in here. And there was a good one. Oh, Hannah did some response on the HACCP. What else have we got? The scale licensing, we've got some resolution there. Do we have one last question for these guys before we release them to their next calls? Oh, Katie Swanson, I see you. Please ask your question.
Hey, yeah. It's a little bit going back to something that was already discussed, but I'm just curious. We don't take ownership of the product either, trying to push that liability off. And so I know it's the responsibility of the vendor to make sure their labels are correct. They have all their licenses and all of that. But I'm curious, I guess, still how you do your quality control. What's the mechanism for assuring that they are actually doing that? Is that something you have to verify before they're allowed to sell with your user services?
Not for Beeline. I mean, that's going to be the relationship between the vendor and the buyer. So in the case of New Seasons, that's what New Seasons is doing. Their product category managers and everything else. It's that relationship. And why we sometimes say we can make recommendations, or we can poke and prod New Seasons to bring a company into their network. We really other than that, that's all we do. We don't have any leverage other than the fact that we say, hey, we can make it easy, but it's really up to New Seasons. And in that case, it's another area that we're not a distributor of record. If we were the distributor of record, then we would be trying to poke and prod New Seasons to pick up our lines, and that would be on us. And then at that point in time, we would be, looking at all the labels and making sure it was good and pushing as much liability down as possible. But in our current world, that's up between New Seasons and the vendors. I would say, talking about the clients, and particularly when you have larger clients like hospitals or institutions or New Seasons or whatever, we found it helpful to really rely on their food safety and certification experts and say, what is the bar that you expect? Past that SOP guidance down to us, we will build it together, and then we will help. Then that we've got it as well. So that was how we kind of have built our pantheon of SOPs. There's a lot of them. So
I wanted to address Caitlin's question in the chat, if that's okay. Around co-packing, I like to think about kind of opening it up a little bit. Right now, kind of most commonly, there's contract manufacturing business, co-packing businesses, and that's all of what they do. I find it really interesting when there are businesses that have built out their own manufacturing for a particular product line or particular business, and then to sort of build out their business, they then take on contract manufacturing clients, and they sometimes might not even see themselves as contract manufacturers, right? Because they're primarily, say, a branded business, but they're also helping make XYZ for someone else. I think that's where we can really open up co-packing statewide, right? Maybe there's someone who's already processing something, and they can process that same thing for someone else or something similar with they're using similar equipment, or within a commercial kitchen too. I've heard actually co-packing even termed as someone's contracting with someone else to make their product in a commercial kitchen, and it's mostly kind of like a helper, right? It's just a helper person they've hired, but they're calling it a co-packer. maybe, there's someone who really loves processing or is already in your commercial kitchen processing some things, and they want to take on another business's processing for them because they have a little bit of extra time on their hands. And I think there's some really cool like win-win opportunities there. So that's what I'll say.
It's amazing. There's so much going on in the chat. There's so many questions and so much activity. I want to respect all of your time. So thank you three for showing up and being so responsive. I'm sure we'll have some follow-up for all of you. But this has been hugely, hugely helpful. And we really, really appreciate it. All right.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Franklin. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you, Sydney and all.
And you're welcome to stay on if you want to listen to the rest of it. But if you want to, free your eyes from the Zoom box, also please do that. All right. Wow, there's so much going on there. I could not even keep up with the chat. So